Okay, welcome everyone to another episode of the Option Menu Crew podcast, and this is episode 38. Your crew members today are myself, Ryan, and with me today is Ed. Ed, how you doing, buddy?
Uh, Good. Well, it's a weeknight this time, coming up on the holidays, so we are, schedules are busy, so we're trying to fit an episode into the more packed schedule. So um,
Yeah,
I'm almost off my game. I'm such a creature of habit where when I'm on a different night, I'm like in a different mindset. But this has been an episode that we've talked about for a while, so I'm
yeah,
ready
yeah,
to contribute.
yeah. A lot of our topics, yeah, we've planned way ahead of time, and then we just fit them into the schedule. And as Ed said, for our listeners, the episodes are going to go up normal times, but we're recording a few days early just because, um, because of the holiday planning and traveling here. So yeah, we're recording on a Thursday instead of a Saturday because we usually record the same day a new episode goes up just to stay on schedule, whatever behind the scenes stuff, logistics. And this episode's topic is about tutorials and learning how to play video games. And we're not necessarily going to talk about basic tips for people to play. We're going to kind of analyze our experiences with learning how to play video games, how it seems that modern gaming has evolved from older games, and tutorials, what we felt has worked, what we do like, what we don't like, what we think needs to be improved, etc. So that's kind of what we're going for, just like with the other episodes here. So this is not really a tips-based episode, but we hope with all the information we're going to go over here that if you're newer to games or play less frequently, that will provide a bunch of new stuff that maybe you haven't heard before, and that will help you out. So we'd love to hear in the comments if there's anything brand new there, and definitely just join in the conversation in the comments through there. So yeah, I guess the first thing we should talk about is when we were learning to play video games, because Ed, you and I are both in our 30s. So what is do you remember learning to play video games? And you apparently came to video games a little bit later than I did. So um what was that like for you? What was your experience kind of like figuring out games?
Yeah, I didn't start until what is PS2? Is that sixth gen or fifth gen? I think that's sixth generation, right?
PS2.
So PS2 and Game Boy Advance were where I started. So I didn't have. I think I got my first system for like my 10th birthday, maybe, or whenever the Game Boy Advance came out. I think that was 2001. So I guess I was a little past 10 is when I got that. So I kind of had the pleasure, convenience of growing up with a bit more modern titles that maybe had more quality of life and you know I guess nobody thought about accessibility back then, so not that's not really the word I'm going to use, but ease of use features then maybe you started with. You played back all the way to the NES, right?
NES,
Or
some Atari experience as well, and that's what I was trying to figure out. I Google it, but I was going to say I think this is the PS2 like fourth or fifth gen, but I'm not sure exactly how
It's not important.
the internet. Yeah,
I don't know why I got hung up on that.
no, it's fun factoids. But yeah, so the PS2 generation. Actually, you were also in a weird sweet spot. Now that's not necessarily that's the generation after N64 and where analog control was really starting to or was really introduced into console gaming. But PS2 was like that mid growth period, and I'd say people were still figuring out even into the next generation that for the PS3 and the Xbox 360, and that's kind of where analog control matured and kind of came out. And I think we could say that for PS4 and Xbox One, that generation was more about like, oh yeah, we get how basic gaming controls should be, and now accessibility seems to be like towards the back half of that into this current generation wars. But yeah, I played way back when with the original Nintendo, Super Nintendo, Sega, etc., and I've played all the way up the generations through. So yeah, I've experienced a ton of different layouts and button systems like that, and trying to figure out how I should play video games. Um, I was thinking back on it, and I was, in our prep, we'll talk about this first. Was instruction manuals. Those were a huge deal. I don't know if you had the same feelings I did, but whenever I picked up a new game, or even if I rented it from like Blockbuster, I always wanted to like pore over the instruction manual. I don't remember exactly if someone had like told me or if I had like organically discovered like the manuals in the box and then saw like just how cool this was. Like, oh, this is telling me how to play the game and it's showing me all this cool art and it's like explaining these things, and then I play the game better. Um, I'm not exactly sure when I noticed it, but then once I did, from then on, like whenever I rented at Blockbuster and it didn't have a manual, I was super bummed. I'm like, how am I supposed to play this game? What am I going to do? What am I missing out? What am I missing out on? And this was also pre-internet days, so it wasn't like I could go somewhere and figure that out. And by proxy, it also made me excited in strategy guides. But yeah, Ed, you were talking about instruction manuals. Do you have any of your favorite instruction manuals?
I I haven't read one in many years, so can't say that I do. But I do kind of remember, like, you get a new game, and on the drive home, like, the instruction manual is really your first exposure to the game. And a lot of them would have like details about the story or the setting, and then they'd go into gameplay and controls. And some of them would just like describe the whole gameplay loop of the game, like this happens, and you go back to it gets they were involved. Um, but I, I can't I can't remember having a favorite instruction manual. I don't know if I was that crazy, but maybe some people do.
Oh yeah, and I'm just asking
Uh,
if anything stuck out on your mind. You don't, if you don't remember something, that's fine. Yeah, I don't remember too many specifically, but there was like I think Mega Man Battle Network on Game Boy Advance. I think the first one, either that one or the second. Like I remember specifically, I like managed to pick up the game just before a work shift, and so I brought the manual to work, and I was just poring over it during my lunch, and I was really excited to play that when I got home. So or actually maybe that doesn't line up properly with, but I do remember it might have been one of the later uh, battle networks, but I do remember pouring over some of those.
I think I remember the manual for the first Kingdom Hearts. I like vaguely remember
I
where
did read that one a lot. Yeah,
I vaguely remember not realizing something like that you could dodge roll or some basic movement function, and I don't know how I missed it, but then I read it in the manual and I'm like, oh my god, this makes things so much easier. I
right.
I think that might have been it. But like, it's funny. I feel like they must have explained that in the in the game, but maybe they didn't. They did ship with manuals back then with the expectation that you'll probably read it to understand the basic details of the game. Like, not every game had a really extensive tutorial in game like they do now.
Yeah,
Um,
manuals really started to phase out towards the late end of PS3 and Xbox 360, and started becoming really rare in PS4 and Xbox One up until current gen, and now they pretty much don't exist this gen because games became much better at creating tutorials in the game, and people didn't need side material as much because they had the space in on discs and cartridges. Cartridges have mostly gone away. And I think like it was kind of Nintendo's handhelds, the DS and 3DS were like the last holdovers for including manuals. But even then, they started, I think, doing digital manuals that you could access through the browsers on there. I don't even know if they actually packed them in on the carts too, so you could just look at it through the game or something on there. I'd have to double check. I think for some they did, not for all of them. But yeah, and now there's all types of online resources and the YouTube videos and things, so it's like you don't even need it. The landscape of learning how to play a game is like completely changed. And way back when, before the internet and stuff, it you learned things through reading the manual first and foremost. Then, of course, word of mouth, and every once in a while, someone didn't understand what they were doing and they were lying to you, and or they had misinformation, so they weren't deliberately lying to
or
you.
they were just making up tall tales about some
Exactly.
secret that they found in the game.
We all know about that. But then also there was the gaming magazines, whether that was like Game Pro or Tips and Tricks, where the magazines were
Nintendo
dedicated
Power.
to Nintendo Power, sharing secrets to help give you reasons to read it. And that create that feedback loop between the games and the material. So yeah, I remember also reading a lot of like Mega Man X manual a bunch, and then like Street Fighter and some of the other fighting games as they were coming out. I would always pore over them because they at least have a starter move list inside the manual. But those it was rare that the manuals ever were like complete information. It was more like a starter guide for like basic stuff. But then for fighting games, like different genres, that's completely different stuff. Um, I always loved it when they were like full color manuals, and it wasn't. I think the Kingdom Hearts one was full color, at least for the most part, or at least some of the art was like full color. Not all of it was full color. So it was always disappointing when I got a manual. It was like all like black and white, and then there was other manuals where it was full color and stuff like that. And I always felt like, oh, that's so premium. Is the deluxe one there? But then strategy guides also too that added another layer. Ed, how many strategy guides did you use to buy? Like, what was your relationship with video game strategy guides?
I bought them for a lot of RPGs that I played.
Mm-hmm.
I actually was like digging through my parents' house when I visited recently,
Mm-hmm.
and I found strategy guides for the Golden Sun games. So I must have used a strategy guide for Golden Sun. I think I was talking to my sister about it either, and she's like, how else would we know how to get the Crossbone Isle, which I guess is like some challenge area. Um, I don't think my memory was as good as hers with with regard to all the secrets of those games. I think I found one for Final Fantasy 1 and 2 for the Game Boy Advance and for Sword of Mana. So I had a couple for the Game Boy Advance left over, but I remember having them for honestly most of the PS2 RPGs that I played. I mean, some of them the secrets in those are so obscure or well hidden that you're really gonna miss them unless you read about them or someone tells you about them. Um, so I recall getting them for most of those games. I don't do that anymore, but younger, I definitely did. And I kind of enjoy that, and like I it's I don't think it took the fun out of it. A lot of people will say it takes the fun out of a game for them to kind of be told what to do, but I never looked at it like that. So I think it at least at that point in my life, they enhanced my enjoyment of playing those games. Um, I know I've seen a couple strategy guides in your house though, so I'm sure you've bought them too. I think I recall seeing the Kingdom Hearts 2 one on one of your shelves.
Oh yeah, and it was I think there was multiple editions. I do have like the premium version with like the hard,
I
well,
think I
the
think I
shell
had that
cover.
I had that same version. Actually, I specifically remember the copy that I got. It like pages falling out of it days after I got it and having to go back to GameStop and like argue with him to get another copy. I actually think my mom went to GameStop and tried to return it, and they were like, "Well, kids are." She's like, he's a teenager. He's not like tearing it up like he's 8 years old. And they were like, oh, okay, we'll give you a new copy. But that's kind of an aside. But
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, there was a couple of my pages too fell out way at the front. I think because of Sora's skill trees and stuff. So I was flipping back and forth between a couple of them, looking at the art for the different skills and forms because I think those were all at the front, and those ones are the ones that kind of fell out. Now that like they came out at the binding. I didn't like tear them or anything, or
That's what
yeah.
I meant. Yeah.
So that one was probably put together a little dubiously. And then it also came with that bonus book, which I think was either like art or achievement. That bonus material.
Didn't one of them have I feel like one of the guides had like stickers for
Yes,
the Dalmatians.
that was one. That'd be Kingdom Hearts 1. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember putting stickers in the guide because they had stickers to keep track of which Dalmatians you got.
I can't remember if I can't remember exactly if I did, but I think I did use but normally like the way I work, I would not have done that. I would have left the stickers intact. I'm like, "No, they like one-time use and they'll wear it." Like, yeah, weird. But yeah, I agree. Or I was the same way with RPGs mostly. I think those games have the most to them and can be the most obtuse. So it's really helpful to have the strategy guides, especially like Final Fantasy VII and all, but not this is an RPG, but also Legend of Zelda. I remember buying the strategy guide for Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, and I feel like that was also very useful because there's a bunch of extra like puzzle element stuff, and you really need it kind of explained bit by bit when you are having trouble trying to figure it out. Especially, I'm talking young, and I know there's some people who are going like, "Oh, you mean you're not legit? It's like cheating." Like there was that huge debate back then that like using strategy guides was like cheating because you weren't doing the game justice by playing it properly, by learning and figuring things out and spending the time. And I was like, no, I just want everything. And as I uh, grew over time, I came to come around on how I use the guides and went like, no, it's not cheating. They're doing some really specific things in these games to actually make it really hard to get everything out of it. And some of these things are very abstract and obtuse. And I've probably mentioned some examples on the previous podcasts, but I will uh, bring them up again. But I did have another quick fun question. Ed, was there any game you ever bought multiple strategy guides for?
Um,
Like different versions? Because sometimes there was.
probably like the Pokemon games, because I think they sold
Mm-hmm,
the Pokedex as a separate
mm-hmm.
separate guide, and I
Eventually.
think the Pokemon games were popular enough that like multiple companies would make a a guide for the same game, and there were a few of those. Nintendo games often had like multiple companies make a copy. Like I think for Metroid Prime and Fusion, like Prima made a guide, but I think there was also like a Nintendo Power guide. Um, but I think Pokemon is the one specifically where I had probably guides from a couple of different companies for various. I think that was for like Gold, Silver, Crystal was the one where I had multiple guides.
Yeah,
Um,
Prima, Brady,
it was
and
like versus books or
Versus.
something.
Yeah. Uh, the ones I've bought multiple for, and the reason I bought multiple was that some because they're written by different people. Sometimes they had more, better, or different assets in them in terms of like screenshots, artwork, and some
Yeah.
some of them just wrote better. So like Nintendo's, which was funny. So Nintendo's official guides, um, those for the most part were tried to be written in a style where they explained some stuff but only hinted at others. I remember this distinctly, and I'd have to check my little guide collection that I still have. I've tossed a lot over the years because they've fallen apart, or I'm like, I'm never going to use these again. And now I just keep what collection I have left as like souvenirs for art. But I remember, and I have this because I do have the Ocarina of Time. I have three Ocarina of Time guides, I think, and I remember because the one official Nintendo one doesn't it fully explain some aspects to what you're trying to do. Like they'll give you hints and like if you do this, there's a secret here. Or for like bosses, they won't fully explain like the weaknesses. They're like, it might be a good idea to do this. And even in the Pokemon guides, the same thing. Like you might want to check around here for a special Pokemon. So there was like information that was missing. And like you said, for the Pokemon, the early books, they included everything together. I think sorry, I was thinking the remakes.
Red and Blue.
Red and Blue and Gold and Silver. I think those were like all in one books. But then once we started getting over 300 Pokemon with the Ruby Sapphire Emerald, they started to do the separate. So they do the campaign book that would actually like teach you how to get through there and only mention some of the Pokemon information. And then they'd sell the Pokedex separately, which would be all the Pokemon, all their evolutions, every single move list, how you get the moves, etc., etc. So
Where you can catch them.
yeah, and they've only kept doing that more over the years because you need an entire extra encyclopedia for all the Pokemon that exist. Um, and I didn't like that, and I stopped buying the guides. But then also the internet was growing at the same time, so it became less and less necessary to purchase those extra things unless you wanted the art and you wanted something physical offhand because we didn't really have tablets and smartphones that we could just keep in our second hand uh, or like
Yeah,
referencing the
you're not
information
like
quickly.
dragging your desktop computer to the couch.
Yeah. And then YouTube videos take off, and now you can look up a video, see exactly what you need to do, and then you just remember it. You go back to the game and do it. Um, so yeah, I did buy the multiple guys because some of them were better than others in terms of the information they had. I have two guides from Final Fantasy VII. I have the official Brady Games one, and then I have I believe it's Versus Books, or it's a different one. That actually, the reason why that one was better, actually had worse art. I think the actual team that made the guide did their own art for some of the things, or maybe they were pulling concept art, in which case, cool on them that they used all that. But I think some of it was custom. I'd have to double check. And I don't mean oh, I feel like a jerk for saying it was bad art, but it just didn't seem like official. But at the same time, it may have been concept art that they were using from assets and whatnot. So, um, it might have been less polished in terms of that. And if it was custom art, I mean, still good on them for that's extra effort they put in. But compared to like the official art, it felt like it was not nearly as good as some of the more finished art. Um, but then also for explanations, I remember like the Gold Chocobo for Final Fantasy VII. The alternate book was way better at explaining how to get it than the Final Fantasy VII book, and it may have actually been typos or just incorrect information because that did happen sometimes. They would have incomplete information when writing these guides, and so sometimes that's why there were issues there. Um, and then, but I did want to ask, so Ed, how did you usually interact with guides? Because I kind of evolved on how I learned how to play and kind of internalized that whole is it cheating thing. So when you were using strategy guides for your game, did you go like by the Bible, or did you like try out stuff and then kind of only reference the book when you needed it? How'd you end up like doing that?
I'm not sure I remember, but if I had to guess, I think I probably went pretty closely to what the guide recommended. Um, I've never been too creative of a person, so I I kind of like following instructions. I like things that are straightforward. So, um, for me, I think probably going by what it recommended is probably how I used it. Um, and a lot of it was I like to read ahead too to kind of know what to expect. And um, yeah, I would look a little bit ahead of where I was just to kind of plan ahead. Um, so I mean, it, it and it depends on the kind of game too. Like a lot of the times the big usefulness for some of those guides was more in the maps that they provide, and the lists of items and moves and all the different details. So maybe I would follow the walkthrough, but I was definitely jumping around to some of the more data intensive parts of the guides. And I like to read ahead and find out about stuff that might be later in the game. It kind of got me excited to keep playing.
Okay. Did you ever feel like you spoiled a surprise for yourself, or was it pretty much like you just said, where you got more excited, so when you got there, it was like a second rush when you actually got to the thing?
Uh, I mean, I probably got spoiled back then, just like I get spoiled now. I mean, it's just it. I never. I don't think I went back then, or nor do I now. Do I now on the internet go out of my way to avoid spoilers because they really don't bother me that much.
Okay.
I think we're coming up on. We were planning to do an episode soon about remakes and remasters, and you're probably going to discuss some games that I want to play that have yet to play, and I'll probably enjoy them just the same.
Yeah,
So
I'll save that. I have one very specific example I have to talk about and spoil because of um, the way it is, and how it's been labeled. So yeah, I'm gonna say that. I don't want to get into it. Um,
yeah,
but I did.
but spoilers are
So it did.
it happens.
So it was you would read, you would get the information, and then you would get the second rush when you got to the thing. You were just excited in general.
Yeah,
That or
and a lot of the like most of the guides didn't spend a lot of time going over the story events. So like they might mention some character, or like I suppose if you get far enough and you find out that the character is no longer in your party, then you probably assume something happened to them. But they weren't story recaps, and I think most guides did their best not to spoil what they couldn't.
did you appreciate those kind of things where like before we had now where games kind of warn us of points of no return? Can you remember if there was any specific times where like you were glad you read the guide and saw, oh great, I didn't just screw myself out of losing items or into a situation that I didn't know was going to happen if I had organically played?
Man, you're really testing my memory here.
I mean,
But
if you can't remember, it's fine to
I'm
say no. I'm just asking if anything
I
springs to
think
mind.
perhaps with Final Fantasy X was like that, because wasn't there like a point of no return where you were gonna go fight Sin, and after that, like you were not going back to collect any weapons or stuff. So like I feel like that may have been one game where I was happy to know where you know when I would be able to wrap everything up. I know you. I think you played that game as well. I didn't you. You got all the celestial weapons, didn't you?
Yeah, yeah. I actually legitimately, well, I semi-legitimately got those celestial weapons because I did use Game Shark in that game because I thought the sphere grid was stupid. But I did do the lightning challenge legitimately to get Tidus's final weapon, I believe it was. Or no,
I think Lulu's.
either,
Isn't it
yeah, whichever
Lulu?
one's with the lightning challenge. I did that legit. Um, the Blitz Ball I cheated to get all the characters, but I actually like to get all the max power characters and stuff. But I did play the actual game to win it. But I think it's actually pretty easy to win once you have all the right characters. Um, so that's kind of semi cheating there. Or like I did the story events and I did the story battles, and I still fought the fights, but I had like my skills unlocked and stuff like that, so it was way easier with the party members to get that stuff. Um, and I don't remember specifically that situation, but that's the kind of situation I was talking about because in RPGs it happened a lot, but like I would say Final Fantasy VII is the most infamous uh, example of you lose a party member permanently through that game, and I don't remember exactly, but I think their equipment and whatever materia they had also goes away, and I'm sure.
No, that's awful. Why
So,
would they do
and that
that? I guess
happened,
that.
and that happened in some RPGs where, like in some games, characters had specific weapons and armor and items. So it's like if they lost that, well, no other character can use that, so it doesn't matter. But then, like, yeah, the materia and in Final Fantasy VII, the accessories and the materia were all universal. So you wanted to take those back unless they were. And I might have been wrong about that. I forget exactly. But there were other games that do have that where you can do that, or just simply knowing like infamous examples like Resident Evil Code Veronica, where there's some situations where you can leave gear behind or be in a situation where gear is exchanged between characters, and if you don't know what's coming up, you can actually screw yourself out of your best gear because the game doesn't telegraph properly that you should be um, that this is what's going to happen. This is how this play is going to go, and you're going to end up losing these gears. And also, the game didn't have checkpoints. Like part of Resident Evil's challenge is that in the old school, they only had the save points, and they were limited consumables for saving. So, if you wanted to do that, you either need to use multiple slots, which older games didn't always have tons of save slots to them, and then you'd also need to have the foresight to be rotating your saves or not to be saving immediately. So you could be like, oh, this was terrible. Let me roll back. And even then, if you chose to do that, you could lose like an hour or two of progress because of the challenge of it, or trying to figure just the nature of how the game went. So things like that are also like convenience that guides helped us with. But I think also the language in them helped spell out things to be looking for, the way things were. The infamous example I wanted to be of like this is something I would have never figured out without a guide telling me was Final Fantasy 12. And forgive me, listeners, if I've mentioned this on other episodes and whatnot, but this is relevant to this. Was the secret of a spear. There's an
Is
alt.
it the Zodiac spear? Isn't that what it's called?
I think so, but we can just call it the Zodiac Spear. But people will know it's the ultimate spear. It has the highest attack rating. And the way Final Fantasy 12 works, any character can wield a spear if you spec them in that direction. So it's any character could use it. It's just the strongest weapon in the game. And the only way to get it is that it's in a locked chest later in the game, in an area full of chests. And the only way to access that to get that chest to open or even to open is there are 4 unmarked chests throughout the adventure of the game, and you need to not open those. But they are just not marked in a special way. They're just in specific locations. That's not supposed to be anything special because you're finding secret chests all over the place. And I remember when I actually started reading the guide and saw that that was coming up, I was like, oh wait, I don't remember if I opened it. I looked at what the fourth chest was, and I was pretty confident I opened the first chest, and I managed to not open the other three. And I was like, well, maybe I missed it. Hopefully, maybe it's not the same chest I was thinking of. Lo and behold, I get there, I couldn't open the thing. So I'm like,
That's infuriating.
I was just like, that. Oh my god, I'm sorry. That's stupid. That's too much. That is too obtuse. I do not care. My characters will respect. I'll just do what I'll deal with whatever I have. And that's the thing also. So in the end, I don't have to really, you don't need the ultimate weapons. It's just nice to have. Um but it's one of those kind of secrets where that is not there for a normal person to find. That is there for crazy people who like conspiracy theory that like there's a Pokemon you can find under the truck. And like I just watched a Did You Know video recently about the creation of Mew and how that all worked out. And that's actually a really good video. People should go check that out. But it's like those urban legend style things that were like half truths. And I'm like, no, this is dumb. That weapon, there's no point of that weapon even being in the game if that's what you have to do it. And for them to make them these unspecial chests, I'm like, from then on, I was no longer feeling guilty about like spoiling game mechanics type stuff or looking up secrets and how to unlock stuff, because I realized there was going to be things I would never think of, that my brain would just like, even if it was outside the box, the game developers are going to put into these games on occasion to create a secret that only some people can find. And I was just like, I don't care. Like, if you're not going to put in any hints or ways for me to figure this out on my own, I don't care. I will just look it up and find it. So I stopped caring about like gameplay spoilers in terms of here's how you get this or here's how you get that, minus like some of the story stuff. Although I did like read guides, I would start to be like very careful about how I read guides to like avoid any sort of tip off to because like bosses could be huge spoilers. You talk about not story, but at the same time, once you know what a boss is, sometimes that in and of itself is a spoiler. So I got very careful about that. And usually what I do with bosses is once I encountered them, I'd give it a few tries on my own, see if I could figure it out. And if I got stuck, I would go and read like, okay, what's their weaknesses? What should I be really trying to do? What's the point of this? And through that trial and error, I eventually learned like, I learned how to recognize patterns better, how to discern weaknesses better, what sort of tactics I'm supposed to be used to suss out that information. Like they tell you, you can scan or do whatever those abilities are, or things like that. And that applies to all sorts of other games. Because then I like had Resident Evil guides, and then I also had fighting game guides before the move lists were in the games. So I would buy some of those, and that was a great way to see all the moves the character could do, as well as get access to some really awesome art. So I feel like between instruction manuals, strategy guides, reading video game magazines, playing, and then occasionally tips that my friends would also get or give. And I didn't have too many gaming friends back then, and we were all kind of the same level of stuff. Other than I had a friend who was really good at Sonic the Hedgehog, and I would give him my cartridge to like beat it and unlock Chaos Emeralds for me, until eventually I had enough practice that I figured out how to be able to do it on my own. It's still hard, but yeah, it's that kind of stuff. And now I feel much better about learning how to play video games. And I've built up this vocabulary and visual language for understanding how games work. Do you feel the same way, Ed? Do you feel like you've amassed this like agnostic level of video game literacy and you kind of just apply that every time you hit like a roadblock in a video game?
It depends on the genre. Um, I really couldn't call myself an expert in any. I don't think in any particular genre.
I'm not calling
But
myself an expert either. I'm just saying, like, do you feel like you're
I
like
definitely, yeah,
applying?
I'm sure there are things I notice and intuit that, had I not played other games in the past, I would not do that. But honestly, these days, if I don't really struggle too much about any given thing, I'm okay looking something up, or if I want to plan ahead and kind of know that I'm at least going in the right direction with my decisions, I got no shame in that. I so, but as far as playing games. Yeah, I'm trying to think of a specific example here that where maybe I knew something. A lot of the games I've played recently, in the past few years, uh, almost would be expanding on some of the genres. Like I played Fire Emblem Three Houses, and I'd never played a Fire Emblem game before. I I had never played a strategy RPG before, so like to me that was something new. And there were things I learned of that next time I go and play the next one, I'll probably have an easier time. But I didn't play games for like a good portion of my 20s, so like coming back to the hobby, um there's a lot of stuff that is still new to me. So I don't know if I have the same level of literacy that you do in 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 uh in video games.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, and I think that actually speaks to it. Is good for the perspectives because I've learned a lot, and there's still things that I find weird, and then you're like still feeling like you've played less games, so you're still learning a lot, and maybe some stuff you haven't realized is a pattern. Um, but yeah, like I was gonna ask then, do you have any favorite like visual signals or things in games that are like consistent, such as like red barrels are explosive, so you shoot them to blow them up,
Oh yeah.
or the more
Yeah,
modern thing of like,
yeah, you could always tell when something's gonna explode when you shoot it. That is a really good example. Um,
or any of your favorite like visual
just
markers for like.
anything glowing or that kind of looks out of place from its environment is I'm always gonna go and look at that and see if a button prompt comes up that lets me interact with it. I
Mhm.
don't, I'm sure, I think a lot of people have a similar complaint, but it's not so much fun where you can't tell what you can interact with in a game unless you're like spamming some spidey sense or whatever the equivalent is in a game that highlights all the interactable items. I don't enjoy that as kind of a crutch for visual design where
That's a great point, and I can actually
thing-
bring up a good
things
anecdote for
do
that. Sorry.
stand out and you can tell just on first glance if something is interactable. um and I guess you have the complete other side of that pendulum where nothing gives any signal that it can be interacted with, and you don't have any ability to highlight those, so you're just running around waiting for a button prompt to show up where you can press A and find out if something's there. um there definitely is a balance to strike where, and so, and that's not just being literate in game, that literate in those game conventions. I think that is also a game design thing, but I think that's outside the scope of what we're talking about.
I don't think so. I was gonna say, yeah, there's a in terms of like figuring out interactables, that's a very specific example, but one I have a lot of experience with because of Resident Evil. Resident Evil is a series before Resident Evil 4 was very much like a pixel hunty style of game. Starting with, I think they got the visual language cleaned up a bit as visuals got better, and then kind of came back. So like Resident Evil 1 was very bare bones in terms of visuals, and it was from what I've seen, because I've ever played the original PlayStation 1 Resident Evil. I have no desire to as well, and I'm sorry if I offend any other fellow Resident Evil fans. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3 on PlayStation 1, though, they got a lot more detailed. They came a lot it came away, or they came a long way from that first game in terms of the visual department, and so things were a lot busier, so certain things could blend in more, but there was also hidden objects as well. So there was like, if you did click on a certain thing, there was possibilities for you to find extra ammo, health, etc., maybe even a hidden key item or two, but most of the stuff you needed to find had a glow to it, a sparkle or some sort, that was a key that was required, and then bonus stuff was usually what was higher hidden in the pixel hunts. um and then with the modern Resident Evil games, Resident Evil 1 Remake also kind of blended it, where there's a little shine to most items, but because everything was higher detailed and lighting was very controlled, even though some things you could tell like were lit a little differently when they were a 3D model against the static 2D background. Resident Evil 1 remake is, infamous for that, for what I'm saying. And then starting with Resident Evil 7 or Resident Evil 4, really, then starting into the Resident Evil 2 remake, Resident Evil 3 remake, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil 8, you actually get prompts when you get near stuff that you can interact with. And then there's also some stuff that's supposed to be hidden where it's a little harder to interact with. And I recently played an indie game that was channeling Silent Hill and Resident Evil style gameplay, and it had some issues where it did have prompts when you were near stuff you could interact, but there were a few things where the interaction, the point at which your character needed to be in order to get that interaction prompt pop up, was a little too sensitive. It was a little too narrow, and it made it difficult for me to figure out a couple times, like, oh, the reason I'm stuck is because this one element here, like, I can't see enough of the visual clue that they want me to see in order to know what to do. And I wasn't able, even when I combed the edge of the rooms, at least how I thought, my character just was not facing a couple degrees enough for it to trigger the on-screen prompt to show up for me to know that that's the interactive point outside of it. And I'm like, it just really goes to show that, like, a little margin of error can make a huge difference in terms of letting a player know what they can and can't interact with. And it's a fine balance, because things can get really annoying and really overwhelming. So, like, tooltips can sometimes, like, I don't know about you, Ed, but, like, with games that constantly pop up tooltips, like, how often do you want to see the dynamic tooltips? Because obviously, we both agree it's great to have the in-game glossaries where you can go back and the game will explain, like, basic functions, and you can just go look that up in a menu somewhere inside the game. But what about, like, the dynamic tooltips? Which ones, if you've got an opinion, which ones do you like to see pop up consistently? Which ones do you like to go away? What's your current feeling on that?
I think my preferred method for having like in-game tips is just to have it maybe tell you about it the first time and file it away in a menu to where if you need to read it again, you can do that. Like I don't know if I want it explaining it to me every time, but I definitely I need the option to go back to it. And I guess for like for all intents and purposes, that's a manual built into the game. But it's more contextual, where it's like not overwhelming you with details before you'll encounter them playing the game. So I like that approach.
Now, do you prefer if the tooltip, like, um, do you? I don't know how many games you've had this where a lot of games the tooltip will automatically pop up, or if it's like a literal tutorial moment, the game will freeze, bring up a screen, explain. You have to manually click through. Now, do you like being able to, like, manually dismiss things? Do you like it when the game, like, stops you, or do you like things to kind of still be in the action, and then you kind of try out? You can see, like, a screen off to the side or a tooltip.
Like if you're playing the game, I kind of want to be able to dismiss it and go and see all the everything that's happening in that scene.
Yeah.
But if you're navigating a menu, it I like each menu option. Maybe it doesn't have an explanation by the menu option, but there's a field on the screen where it explains what that option does. And hey, we're the option menu crew, so we should know better than anyone. But um, that I think that's the best approach for a tooltip, is just maybe have a field devoted to it, where as you're selecting it, it gives you a little bit more insight into how it works. Like I maybe we need to get a what is a tooltip to you? What does that word mean to you?
When I say the tooltips, I mean, like, you're moving around in the game, you near a point where a special interaction is available, such as, like, a game telling you how to push a rock, let's say, for example, or push a box, and it will pop up with a small box and be like, get close to it and hold forward, and then press A in order to move the rock, and you'll be able to move it this way. And then if you move away, the box disappears, and if you move back, it pops back up. Um, not Games aren't usually that annoying. Now other genres, I'm more used to the action game, but then there's games like there's like RTSs and stuff where they have the dynamic tooltips where you can usually press a button to get to toggle on a tooltip to be able to see more detailed information. So I'm talking more like when you're engaging with a dynamic action. So like I think Red Dead Redemption 2, they had a bunch of things where you could turn on and off for tips for tutorials like getting on your horse, for always seeing the horse controls, always seeing your shooting controls, things like that in the side or side quest tips and whatnot. Although that's a little bit different, but yeah, information on how to play the game, those basic things. It's yeah, there's a fine balance. Usually I'm pretty good at remembering things. I like the HUDs to be pretty dynamic. I appreciate HUDs kind of like fading in and out in games, and controls. I would love some more granular controls for like win things, because I don't mind seeing like my health bar and really useful information like ammo counters, health bars. That's fine. I like it there. I think Resident Evil is a great example. The newer ones like 7 and 8 where the HUDs like fade away after usage, or Remake 2 is also a perfect example of like you only see so much information when you need it and everything else like fades away when you're not. So like when you zoom in and aim your gun, the ammo counter appears. When you let go, it fades out. Your health, you only like when you get hit, and it's only, and your character also has visual indicators. And of course, the king of all like in-game HUDs is Dead Space. Dead Space 1 and 2. With your health bar being on your character's spine, the menus being in world with your character, like being holograms and stuff like that. So those kind of things are really cool. And I like when the games, in terms of teaching me things, I also don't like it if the tooltip. So this is where it's like dynamically.
The word for that, by the way, is like a diegetic uh, um, display.
Oh yeah,
It comes more from the like film and TV. Like music
gotcha.
can be diegetic, where it's actually coming from like a sound source within the scene. And that's the word I would use to describe Dead Space, is like a diegetic HUD, is
Yeah,
it's part of the game itself. It's not an abstraction.
yeah. Um, So yeah, I also, what this is a little pet peeve is tutorials are now I don't even remember what I was using, the tooltip windows. I don't like it when they pop in and that like your traditional action button is tied to skipping them, so they'll pop up and then you'll press that button because you're in the middle of something, and they dismiss because you weren't supposed to, because that button also moves the window. So I prefer a system where like you get a notification that a tooltip's available on a button that's not a primary function button, like not one of the four face buttons. It's usually like a, for PlayStation it would be like press the touchpad to open up a tooltip, and I prefer that.
Oh
And then when you
yeah.
open it up, it pauses the game. It's completely not a button you normally would use, and then you could read the tip, you could see what it is, and then you could dismiss it by pressing the button again, or actually pressing another button. So I like it when games do it more like that, because you can choose to ignore it or learn more. But in general, I think we want, like we said, all the information should always be in a glossary somewhere in game that you can just access. But then also, accessibility features are getting better, so we should have the options to turn on and off just how many tooltips we want to see. Um, and also, some games are doing this, but I think like you can choose whether or not you ever want like something to appear again, kind of like pop-ups and stuff like that. I forget one game I saw that and I thought that was really novel. Um, but yeah, it
I thought of a convention like we were talking about before this, but I just thought of it now, of a convention that really has been drilled into me from playing games, is like NPCs. Like you always talk to them until they just repeat their last line of dialogue,
yes,
right? Is like if you play enough games where there are non-player characters, which is NPC, and you exhaust every dialogue option, and sometimes you even get to like dialogue options where, well, this one looks like it's really going to make them mad, so I better save before I do this. I don't want to end up killing them or have them kill me. So it's like, interacting with NPCs is, I think, is something that you learn the conventions of how to get the most out of those interactions. I
yeah,
actually recently finished. I was playing with one of my friends, Police Knots, which is an adventure game on the PlayStation One, uh, directed by Hideo Kojima. It actually wasn't in English. I used the fan translation, but in every one of those, you can click on anything in the scene, and you probably get three, four, five, six different descriptions and dialogue options on each one. And if you played those games before, you keep clicking the same thing until they say the same thing maybe two or three times because you don't want to miss any of the details.
Yeah, yeah. So that's like a genre specific style quirk. But backing up a little bit into the more general topics with tutorials. Now, um, how do you feel? Have you noticed any patterns about like what do you like when you're first starting a game and you go through the first tutorial? It's usually what it is. The first missions are typically tutorials. What are the things you like to see?
Hmm. I just like things. I like it, and this kind of is not just at the beginning, but I like when they slowly introduce concepts. Like, I don't want to be having to understand everything about the game from the beginning.
How
Um,
slowly can you use an example from one of the recent games you played? I mean, you're playing
um,
Shin Megami Tensei 5 right now, right?
I
Uh,
haven't started it yet. No, I'm
oh
gonna start
no.
it I'm gonna start it this weekend when I'm at my parents because I got my Switch. I'm not gonna
Gotcha,
drag
gotcha,
my
gotcha.
PlayStation 5 to visit my parents. That thing's enormous. So I'm
Sure,
I'm
sure.
saving it. I'll probably
So
be starting it on Saturday. But
okay.
uh
Let's talk about Metroid Dread. I was gonna call it Microsoft Dread, but that's Metroid Dread. We both played and beat, so we've got a good frame of reference there. And you're a super big Metroid fan, supposedly. uh, so what do you think of the way that game opened with its tutorial, or what do you think of that game's tutorialization for the beginning?
I think it's hard for me to give an unbiased opinion coming from having played all the previous 2D Metroids. But I think if you were a fresh player, it does a pretty good job of introducing it. Like it probably does the best of any game in that series of telling you how each new ability works. It has like tips on the loading screens that give you details. Like I remember there being a tip that every attack from enemies is avoidable, and
Mm-hmm.
that's the idea there being like you shouldn't have to tank any damage to win a battle. So, and I think there was also some tip that uh, from the internet discourse that I read a lot of people missed, that you want to be shooting blocks to see if they will break.
Now, funny thing with that. So, and I don't say this as like, well, I am critiquing Metroid. Um, you don't always reveal what the block is by shooting it, which is the regular power beam. You either needs to usually be the missile, which they give you a ton of missiles. They want you to use the missiles, and they refill the missiles also pretty frequently as well, either from enemy drops or the missile stations or the refill stations. Um, but it's also the charge beam. I think also works for some blocks. Now, do you feel like do you just see if you can put yourself a little bit outside of your head? But do you think it's necessary that someone should have to waste ammunition just to discover whether a block is breakable? Or do you think it would have been a little more fair if, like the power beam, you shoot a thing once, it reveals what type of blocks, because all the blocks have indicators on them of what makes them breakable. So, what do you think of that? Do you feel like that's fair for someone figuring out resources? Because as I explained, when I first played it, I was trying to figure out what's breakable and what's not. And for some things, you can kind of tell it's going to be breakable or there's a block in it before you expose what the block is. But then in that first part, there's resealing blocks or reappearing blocks, whatever, respawning blocks, excuse me. And in that very first section, I gave myself a soft block because I ran out of missiles trying to fire in all the areas to figure out how to unlock that next wall. Now, yeah, and I sound like a complete noob in that regard, but I was just like a couple pixels off from where the explosion needed to be for the blocks to appear, and then the block was appearing behind me. So first off, I would say you don't need that disappearing block behind you. This is the tutorial. Why would you even bother? Because they put a missile refill station right over there. And so clearly they thought, okay, someone could get stuck here. Let's make it easy to refill their missiles. We'll give them 15 missiles, which is the most any Metroid starts you out with. We will put a block here,
you don't start with missiles in any other Metroid game.
which is interesting. You not even in Fusion?
No, it's an early upgrade that you get
Wow.
from like a data station. You get it pretty quickly, but you only have your beam and jump. That's pretty much all you have from the beginning. You don't even have morph ball,
Yeah,
which I guess you did. Yeah, you definitely don't have a slide, and you can't crawl.
yeah.
So
Dread is unique in that it gives you
Dread was weird. The
gives you
whole
tons of
progression.
missiles, hides that morph ball like all the
Yeah.
way in the game.
Yeah, we're getting into little spoilers here, so maybe if people are worried, you
It's
might want
power
to.
ups. We didn't spoil anything that matters. You don't get the morph ball for a little bit. There you go. Don't worry about it. Like, yeah, just when you get the morph ball, you've got the morph ball, so don't worry about it. But anyway, so that very first area, yeah, I get stuck in there and I had to reload, and the checkpoint is only a minute away. That's not a huge deal. But still, I just felt like it was a little tough to be like, if I'm a pixel off from something or just a little too far off, that it's not breakable, or them not having more breakable sections there, because I think it was like 2. And I get that we're trying to teach you 2 things at once. They tried to teach you sliding, which becomes becomes less useful over time because you get the morph ball. But the slide is actually really useful because it's the quick way of moving and getting back into an offensive position, rather than the morph ball, which is almost a completely different style of play. So I think it also trying to teach you the 2 things at once, and also, like, I'm not sure what they thought about the respawning block, because that respawning block means that if you run out of missiles, you get stuck there. And I think that's
Well, I think all missile blocks in the game work like that, and in some situations, there's like certain puzzles
some,
where
yes.
to get a power up, part of the challenge of executing that maneuver is you have to like destroy a bomb
Right.
block and you have to destroy different types of blocks in succession in a quick enough that they don't respawn. So like there are gameplay reasons why it does respawn, but I suppose for that in that particular instance they could have, but it works like any other missile block in the game. So that's probably why they didn't make that one an exception.
That which would be fine if it was on, like, if it had been on the other side of the wall, because like the next 2 are missile blocks as well, but the one between there and there, like the one between that first spot, didn't need to be a missile block. It could have just been a destructible element.
Yeah,
Okay,
it could have been a beam block, yeah, I
yeah,
suppose.
or a beam block, yeah, because there's 3 things they're teaching you right there, all at once. And I'm not trying to sound like a novice or anything, but there are people who this is probably one of the few video games they've ever played, or like a kid's picking it up for the first time or something like that. It's only played like Fortnite, and they're like, "What's this? How does this work?" Um, it was just like one step too many they were trying to do, because they were trying to teach you missile, slide, and you can say also the way blocks respawn and all these rules and stuff like that. And yes, it's extremely low stakes considering where the checkpoint is, but I still feel like that was just like one extra thing too many that just makes that weird for how they were teaching that. But that's an extremely small nitpick. But that is a tutorial. But I do, so let me turn over and go to praise. And I think it's great because Metroid Dread, I think, is very balanced in terms of, once you pick up a new power up, a static tip window shows up that shows you also with a video. And that's also been cool that video games have started putting in little videos to show you how power ups work visually, or how mechanics are supposed to work, I should say. It shows you, it explains a few basic things about what this power is supposed to do. And then when you pick up those main power-ups, typically the very next thing you're allowed to do, or the ones at the Chozo statues, not necessarily the ones you get from the bosses. Those are a bit different. but the ones you pick up from the Chozo statues, usually the next thing you have to do is escape the area using the power, and so you're forced to use the power the way it's supposed to learn it. Also, I was not complaining about the respawning block for like optional puzzles and those like optional power ups because that makes sense. It's a little challenge. I was just talking about this tutorial area, like it didn't need it, but anywhere
Yeah,
else,
I
like it
think
made
they
sense.
could have done it differently for that
Different,
one.
yeah.
I suppose. Yeah.
That's all I was arguing there. But yeah, Metroid
I
Dread.
mean, I mean, now I know how those, the Souls zealots feel about. I don't want this easy mode in my game. I mean, part of me like, what do you mean they're gonna make it easier? But it's they certainly. I suppose they could have streamlined that a little bit.
Yeah, and that
But
yeah,
I do like the way that, and this is common in all Metroid games, is when you earn a power, an ability, you're pretty much expected to use it shortly, and that's kind of the tutorial in a way, because you can't really progress until you understand how to, and that execute that power. And one of those that probably could trip up people, maybe not in newer games because it's a little more streamlined, but the space jump, I know you had some issues of how that was executed, but in past games, when you earn the space jump, you were pretty much stuck in that room until you mastered how to use it. Like you weren't going to move on and be able to escape until you understood how to execute it. But I think that in general is good design, because it does, maybe it's not the most friendly design, but it does ensure that once you've moved on from that point, you understand um, the new ability. But it can be a little bit of like a trial by fire, where if you don't get it, there's no one helping you on how to get it. I specifically remember when I played Metroid Fusion as a child, that the point after which you earn the speed booster, uh, you get back to the save room by using that speed booster, and I didn't know that convention. I didn't put two and two together that I have to use this immediately after to progress, and I ran into this this wall that I couldn't figure out how to get past. And I feel stupid now, but most kids are not that good at video games. That's why they make Pokemon games easy.
well, yeah. So I guess that raises another interesting question. There is, um, what how we feel about games like Dark Souls or even Metroid, where they try to be a little more difficult and obtuse about things. Now, Dark Souls is a bit different, but Metroid, I think, has the right balance. They explain some of the fundamental uses of each power up, give you an immediate challenge on how to like use that power, make you use it in order to progress, so you get used to it. Then there's still secret tech for you to figure out how to do it, and that's what those extra challenges and pickups are. Sometimes you hit a new thing and it wants you to learn. Some of those are fundamental new ways where they're trying to teach you to fight a boss or something, or it's just if you fight a boss a different way, how to use a tactic different. Specifically, like how the shine spark. There's tons of ways you could do it. I didn't even know until I saw it in a video that you could shine spark diagonally, and I was like, wait, what? I thought I could only do up, down, left, and right. And I think the tooltip basically leads you to think that way. Um, and I just figured it would only be available because I'm like, oh, that'd be way too broken if it's diagonal. But no, you can't. You can, and and you can also shoot in the morph ball. But the game does hint at letting you shine spark and morph ball if it doesn't straight up tell you. But then there's dark.
You can do that in the older games like Zero Mission too,
Right,
diagonal and in morph ball.
right.
I actually I keep watching on YouTube, and it keeps showing up in my feed, all these like Shine Spark videos from all the Shine Spark puzzles, all the Metroid games,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's an interesting power.
So yeah, there's like interesting, unique ways to use powers, and sometimes it's glitch related. We're just and I'm not saying Dread necessarily does this, although people do use stuff to glitch through, and can break progression. And I think to some degree the developers knew that like their powers could probably break in certain ways. They just let it happen, which they did account for certain sequence breaking. There's proof of that in the game design. But then there's games like Dark Souls that are much more about obtuse. Now, being obtuse. Now, there's one thing I've heard from listening to people who are much bigger Dark Souls fans than I am. I can't really count myself a Dark Souls fan. I haven't beaten it, played them. I want to love them. I want to like them because they're action RPGs, uh, and they have some decent, challenging combat and stuff like that. But I'm just a little wuss, and I can't do it. I did beat Sekiro though. I did beat Sekiro with a lot of complaining, but I did enjoy Sekiro overall, and I thought it was a great game. And I'm just like, okay, if they tweaked the Souls formula just a little bit, then I could be way more into the series. But there's certain things they just straight out don't explain, and this is one thing that's actually intolerable. And I wanted to preface with the Metroid example of it. There's still some secret tech. There's like false stats in Dark Souls, or they don't explain how stats work into weapons, or certain weapons just the game kind of lies to you about how things work, and that's not cool. I think if you're gonna have stats and things, it should be more explicit about how this stuff works. You should have the consistent stuff here, and it shouldn't ever be straight up like we're showing you these numbers, but actually the math behind there is really convoluted. I don't like that. I hear about some of that in fighting games and other games. It's just the math should always be something a person could do in their head and figure out, and there should be other aspects if you want to make it more interesting. But I think math should always work, should be like transparent. But what do you think, Ed, in terms of games, leaving out sometimes critical information? Like how much information do you think is good, or do you think that games should, like just like with difficulty settings, games should have completely explicit tutorials for people who really want them and a ton of information? But you could turn it off and be like, at normal difficulty, we are not going to tell you all the information. If you want it, you can go here for that, or you can look it up in some other place, or like easy mode. Or do you think that kind of like the way the debate's been for like Dark Souls, where it's like, no, if they want to make the game this way, then you just have to deal with it, and that's just the way it is, even if it becomes like an accessibility issue to some degree. What's your take on that in terms of how do you feel if you feel like a game is too challenging or didn't explain something properly?
Um, I like when it explains it in game, but I don't think it always has to be like an explicit prompt, telling you this is exactly how it works. I what I've been playing recently, and I'm still working on, is Persona 5 Royal, and I do look up things in that, but I am realizing that as you play the game, you see these little scenes where someone mentions something, and they always highlight like in red text a little detail that, oh, maybe I should go check this out. Like, going to this location will earn me this thing, and a lot of the things that I have looked up, how do I raise this stat or this, but I'm realizing that had I played it blind, I probably would have been okay, because it does a good job of that kind of like flavor text of, if you it gives you a lot of hints, and it's not like a tooltip. It's you overhear a conversation of two NPCs talking about a location or a character, and you go and investigate that, and um I like that approach for some of the secret stuff, of where it's not right in front of you. You kind of have to pay attention, but it's there if you seek it and are listening. And I don't know how it works in Dark Souls. Is some of that stuff even hinted at in the game, or is it just not said anywhere? Like, I know like Souls fans always talk about all the lore in the game, and I'm not exactly sure what that means, but maybe it means that those things are there. They're just a little more obtuse, and you really have to dig to understand them. And I think that's okay. Like, that's a preference, but I and I guess some of it is back. It's harkening back to at school, where people would collectively figure out a game. And in this case, you have people on the internet collectively kind of learning the mechanics of a new game. And I think that's a valid approach. Like, developers kind of know that people are going to discuss a game on the internet. People are going to make guides. So like, I don't know if everything has to be in the game obvious. It'd be nice if you can discover it on your own, but I'm okay with some of it being a little obtuse, um, because that's part of the fun to me is engaging in the conversation about the game and discovering things that maybe aren't right in front of your nose.
I am completely fine with the games not like hiding non-critical bonus type stuff. That's completely fine. I think core mechanics to a game are how things work, and then not leaving nuances to secret uh is the trap here. Like I think the game not telling you we'll use the shine spark again. I think the game not telling you that you can shine spark through doors is okay. I think the game not telling you that you could shine spark diagonally is not okay. If I was to go back and change something, I'd be like, mention it can go in different directions. But how do you do the door? What about the door thing? Do you think that's critical? I'm like, well, as it's something you could teach through a game thing of like, hey, there's only one way to progress this way, and it's this part here. And if you realize, oh, you keep running, putting you in a situation where that makes the most sense, and it's like, oh, then that's cool. But you can get either coming in with your own preconceived notions about a way a game works. Just as I was saying before with the Final Fantasy 12, I've never encountered another game where that would have been sort of a thing, that there would have ever been a pattern
Yeah,
you would want to try.
that one's not okay.
And there's always instances where games could be like, oh, well, we want you to think this way and do this thing, but it's like no other game does this, especially if there's any sort of commonality between them. So with Dark Souls, in terms of like the stat thing is the best thing I have, because it was a recent thing that I listened to a podcast where they talked about secret stats, or how, or the way stats work and the math behind it is very obtuse and weird and not obvious, and certainly and not consistent. Inconsistency is also a problem. Things should work consistently, or there should be a consistency to how things work when you're introducing a mechanic. So that bothers me as well. What I was looking up on my phone was I recently played, or I didn't recently. I played Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, which is the Castlevania spiritual successor. And there's a way to get the true ending. And I'm not going to completely spoil getting the ending here, but there's another example I could say in there that was critical to progress. Now I get some people might say also because it is part of the labyrinth genre that some people refer to as Metroidvania, is that this is part of the thing. You're supposed to struggle and try and figure it out. And I'm like, I think that now with the way games are, there's no reason for that. This isn't like where we had the arcade or games were only like 3 hours long and we need to pad them out. And there's nothing wrong with games being about 3 hours long anyways at this point. If you design it that way, like, good on you if that's the experience you want to give people. I'm talking about if you've got a long game and you want people to go through it and you want them to figure things out. But if there's like core progression, you shouldn't tie that to certain random stuff, or it shouldn't be, or there should be some sort of in-game hint you can find. So one example with Bloodstained is getting the ability to, I think it was either swim or breathe underwater. I forget which exactly it was. Allows you to walk underwater. I'm looking at the page in my phone right now. The way you do that, just like in this game, which mimics some of the other Castlevania games, you have to beat enemies, and enemies have a random chance of dropping a shard with their ability. Now, some enemies have critical abilities, this being one of them, but the shard drops randomly. It doesn't. I think they patched it because the odds were way lower originally, and they increased the odds in a patch. Because I remember when I played it, it was a little while after the game had come out, so there have been a couple patches. And when I finally got around to it, I think it only took me like either it popped on the first one or it popped on like the second one. And also I had been warned about you're gonna need to do this in order to get this power up in order to progress and keep moving forward. Something like that's critical progression should absolutely just happen. And it should be like, I think it should have made you have to kill an enemy to get that if it's part of critical progression. But if it's part of bonus progression, like, oh, if you get this power, then it means you can just explore these other bonus areas that just give you extra stuff. Like, they're cool and they can help, but they're not required to beat the game. Also for getting the true ending, because like in other Castlevanias, there's like a secret, or there's like it's a fool's bad ending where if you only do it this way, leads you to an untrue, the non-canonical ending, but it is an ending, hits you to credits. There's actually another thing, and they try to they telegraph it slightly, and I'm sure for people who have pre-existing knowledge of Castlevania, it made sense. Hang on, I'm looking at the options here. Oh yeah, there's like you go to a room and there's a blood red moon in it, and it looks just like a background decoration. And I don't think there's any sort of hint for this, but in order to get the real ending, besides getting a few other items that are like super key to doing this, which are also not really spelled out for you or hinted to in any way, is then you have to attack that moon. And this is one of those things where if that was to lead you to like a bonus challenge room, I would totally be like, that's super neat. But this room is completely empty. There are no enemies. There's nothing else that would tell you, hey, you can attack this thing, or you should attack this thing. There's nothing where you can even accidentally do it unless you were in this room and just jumped around. Like, there's secret, like, if there was in other stages where it'd be secrets, like, oh, if I swing an empty space, kind of like Mario. Like, Mario can teach you that there are invisible blocks in places. So you should try jumping just about everywhere, because you may find a bonus 1-up or a bonus power-up or another secret alternate path. There's no mechanics like that in Bloodstained. So there's no reason to do that. It would just be like, either if you know, you know, and once, actually that's it. If you know, you know. And that's frustrating. I think if a game doesn't hint at a certain way for a critical aspect, and they might consider it non-critical because you get an ending if you really want.
But this is the true ending,
right? I think I draw the line there. Like stuff should be telegraphed to a reasonable degree, especially if it's critical. If it's bonus, then that's fine. If it's secret and obtuse, just like the weapon, like I hated it, but ultimately it is optional. It's not critical, so I can just ignore it.
Yeah, the what I'm playing now I mentioned is Persona 5 Royal, and that has a third semester in it, which I guess that would make it a trimester, but they call it the third semester.
Right. Yeah.
And that's locked behind. I don't know how you would know this, but if you don't max out your social links for these like 3 characters, and there's like over 20 different characters, and you're probably not going to max it out with all of them. You're probably going to pick the ones you like. But if you happen to not like these ones or care about them, then you're locked out of like 20 hours of gameplay. Like, this very specific requirement to even access that extra gameplay, that extra story content. So yeah, I agree with you. It shouldn't be that obscure of how to unlock. Like, it's one thing if there's like multiple ending and there isn't necessarily like a true ending, like there isn't one with additional content. I think it's valid to have a game where your choices influence the ending you make, and one isn't necessarily inherently better than the other. Maybe people have their preference, but I think it's cool almost to have people end up in have a different experience. But when it's locked behind something that isn't clear, I agree with you. That's not good. You and I both played the Nier Replicant remaster earlier this year.
Oh my god, yeah.
And you want to talk about story content locked behind a bunch of nonsense? That might be the worst one I can think of. Where
I don't think if that is the worst. I feel like there was an example I'm forgetting where it is not where it's worse than that. But I don't. What's really egregious, in my opinion, for Nier Replicant, we haven't decided, we haven't done the dedicated episode that we planned on doing, which was that you can cut out one of the runs. There's enough. Eventually, I think like in this new one, it's 4 runs through the game, but it could easily be 3. Or I think it's 5 runs actually, because there's A, B,
I
C,
think
D,
I
E.
think I think you play the second half 3 times.
Yes.
Because the last ending is like, well, is starting the game over. But
Yes, the last ending you have to start over, basically fresh and scratch, and then go through it and until it's different. And you don't have to
yeah,
go through a ton of the game, but it's enough to make you go oof. But even that, I get that. That part I'm not mad. And the how to get ending E, I'm not mad about. It's that I think you can get rid of, you can combine C and D. No, you can combine B, C, and D. You really
yeah.
only
You,
need
you
2
you really should
runs.
be only 2 runs exactly.
3 runs should be the max, because there's so
Yeah,
little content between C and D. C is literally a different option after you've done everything in B. And then oh no, C and D are only separated by 1 choice. And the amount of content you get different for D is super small, even after,
and
because
it takes you like an hour and a half to replay that segment, or at least
yes.
to get that content.
Yes.
And
And
there, it'd be one thing if you could just like save right before the choice you have to make and make a different choice. But this one, like the checkpoints, way far back, so you're replaying a lot of stuff.
yeah, and the thing is also, while it's driven by a choice, um, thing is you could actually combine the two. You could still do it where it's like you. The only difference is that the choice, there really isn't a choice other than you don't get the extra scene, because you could have gotten the extra scene and then still gotten the other thing to happen. It story wise, it doesn't contradict itself by not having a choice. But yeah, that's not necessarily like, that's not obtuse. That's more like dragging stuff out. That's just adding an extra layer you didn't need to be there. That's more like about streamlining an experience. Um,
Well, I mean, you still kind of need a guide on how to unlock those. I mean, I looked up how to do it because I didn't want to miss anything and miss out on story content.
I looked it up
Um,
too, but the I found inconsistency in information, because one of the criteria, and the game tells you this, I think the game tells you most of it, is you have to unlock all the weapons. You have to purchase and buy
yeah,
all the weapons. Um, Now, I found conflicting information that you couldn't get the weapons that you left from part 1 in part 2. But then I also read one place that's like you can buy all the weapons you missed in part 1, part 2. I don't know which is true, because I just collected them all as they
yeah.
went.
Say I read that same thing.
So, um,
You don't want to make the mistake and have to start
no,
the game.
no, it's there's too much the same for that to even be done. And I mean, if you only replay part 1, you can only go back to part 1 once, and you can't. And even though ending E requires you to play part 1 again, it wouldn't. You can't get to ending E without meeting that criteria before. So I think that's where quality of life should have been like, hey, if you miss these weapons, we're gonna put them in the secret shop, make them super expensive. Like, that's a quality of life thing. And actually, just to bring that up, because I'm referencing this else, I don't care about Automata having the ability to let people buy trophies in the secret shop, in their one secret shop. I think that's hilarious, and
Oh
it's
yeah,
fun.
I think that's great. That's just like a whole meta joke to it.
Yeah,
I think that's
yeah.
really funny. Yeah, I agree.
I get that people like love trophies. That is a completely subjective value proposition you've put on that. So who cares? No, if you care, go ahead and legitimately get it. But for
And it
everyone
messes
else,
with the
who
player too, because
cares?
someone could be like, "Well, I'll just cave and buy this trophy," and then after they get the platinum, they're just filled with regret that they didn't earn it properly.
Oh yeah,
Like, oh, I
I
should have done it the right way.
I could see how people would get mad at the metagame, because be like, oh, did you actually do it though? You bought it. So I know you. So how do I know that you actually did it or didn't? Um, and I think it really doesn't matter if another player doesn't want to fess up to how they got trophies. Whoop de doo. The developer is going to be able to know because of the telemetry data that they gather from the online stuff. That's really all that matters. I guess it does sound disrespectful to that metagame, but I don't care because it's intrinsic. Trophies are optional, whatever. we can now save replay clips in there. So if you want to save like a cool thing, people can make up their own achievements and trophies, whatever. Or they could always have differentiated in the list and had like a second thing. Like if you purchase it, it pops a second thing, so you can tell that these like other trophies are there or whatnot, whatever. But it's only, and I guess the PlayStation ecosystem is a lot more of an issue than the Xbox ecosystem, because with the Xbox ecosystem they've got the gamer points, so they can have 0 point achievements, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But with the PlayStation ecosystem, you can only get a platinum trophy by unlocking all the other trophies. So if you had these, like, I don't think you can have optional trophies. Like in terms of like trophies that you can get a platinum regardless whether or not you unlock these. So maybe that's a new category they need to have. That's just like bonus trophies. And then that way these don't count towards the platinum, but they can be earned or not earned, and they're still there on your record. I don't know. But once again, I'm not a trophy hunter, so it's a trophy/achievement hunter. So that is not something for me to decide. I'd be fine either way because I just don't care. But yeah, so like going back to tutorials and learning how to play the game, I'm all in favor, and I think it's great that we've got the videos and stuff like that. Is there anything else, Ed, you think like you're really happy about in terms of or pros and cons? Because we're nearing the end of the episode here. So is there anything that you're like really happy about that you've liked that's been added to tutorials and teaching how to play games? And is there anything you still think we need to improve on going forward that like we haven't learned our lesson from?
Um, I will say this isn't necessarily, I mean, this is kind of a consequence of the fact that games have better tutorials and there are more resources online. But I kind of miss like physical strategy guides. Like there's something about them, but no, they don't make them anymore, except for all but the most popular games. And for even for those, they're kind of a a novelty where it's more about the art and the content, and having a nice hardcover book, and they even become outdated when they make updates to the game that change features. But I kind of miss that as a thing. And
They still sell strategy guides for new games.
not many. Most of the games I play, they do not. But perhaps that's because they are more of a niche genre.
Let's just do a quick little test here. Name me the last 5 games you played, and hang on. So we're gonna start with Shin Megami Tensei 5 because that's the one you're about to play. And
Yeah.
I'm not seeing a GameStop page.
There isn't one. I'm looking on Amazon.
Okay, there isn't one. Next, Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
Yeah.
Now, I was expecting Shin Megami Tensei to definitely have a strategy guide because that is like RPGs, Japanese RPGs especially, like they love to have strategy. Now, maybe there's one that's going to be out later that's going to be like a huge demon compendium.
I bet there's one in Japanese. I think they're still more common in that country.
I was expecting to see something pop up on. No, I'm not seeing one physical for Rift Apart either, so that's 0 for 5. Metroid Dread now. I see one.
The only ones you get on are like on Amazon where someone slaps together like a 50-page pamphlet and they try to sell it to you for like it's not a real thing.
Okay.
Like, and you look at the reviews and they're all garbage. So these are just
Prima
like
made one. Prima made one for Metroid Dread.
No, they didn't. Let me see.
I'm looking at it right here on Amazon. Oh no, Metroid Samus Returns. My bad.
Oh yeah,
sorry, I read.
You know what's really funny is my public library has like 10 copies of the Metroid Samus strategy guide, Samus Returns strategy guide. I don't know why they bought them.
All right. So that's 0 for 5. So that's over half. So we'll just do one more. What else have you played? What was one of the other? Don't use police knots. Don't use police knots.
I looked up Psychonauts 2. That one didn't have one.
Okay, there we go.
I'm pretty sure Neo: The World Ends With You didn't.
No, that would be another one I would imagine would have had one, but they're not.
They don't make them anymore.
They very rarely. You are correct. It's much more rare now. They used to be for like everything, and even some of the smaller games used to get them as well. I'm sure. I think Ratchet and Clank 2016. what year was the new Ratchet and Clank
Yeah,
reboot?
2016. I don't think it had a strategy guide.
I think I Oh well, but yeah, they some games do. Also, it was funny. I the podcast we like to listen to, Castle Super Beast. Pat was talking about how Monster Hunter, how they used to sell the strategy guide later with all the detailed Monster Hunter stats, and you like that was the thing. They're like, in the game, everything's obtuse and weird, and people would have to speculate and figure stuff out, and then they would sell the giant guide and it would have all the information in it. So it'd be like double. That's how they double dip with microtransactions. And then with World, because they knew they couldn't, they wouldn't be selling those guides in America. They put all the information in the game. So that's why suddenly Monster Hunter is like way easier to understand. For the stats and like math and nuance and stuff to mechanics is because yeah they can't sell the extra stuff to double dip on microtransactions. So yeah, strategy guides are less. I get that. I think it'd be cool if they at least sold like PDFs online because I think like I bought the Kingdom Hearts character guide thing, and while it's pretty cool, and I think for someone who's either a fan or someone who wants like a refresher on what the Kingdom Hearts story is and where the characters have been, it's pretty neat. But it's missing. It doesn't have any concept art in it, which I really wish it did, and it's certainly missing like it doesn't. Not all of the art in there is like nice big renders. They're all different sizes and things, so that makes me a little sad. I would love to see like a PDF, a dynamic PDF where it like had big full scale images that I could have like purchased and seen. Although you can also just rip all that stuff. People rip the high version high res assets anyways from different sources all the time and put them online. But it'd be nice if there was an official thing, and I think people would pay for them if they could. So if they had the option to, but instead they just don't. Um, yeah, so I see that. But yeah, is there anything else in terms of the way tutorials are that you like or don't like? Want to see improved?
I trying to think of it. I don't think I've played any recent game where I felt like the tutorials were really bad. But I would like to see like they do with Monster Hunter, more just like in-game information about those kind of stats and classes and weapons. Like, it would be nice to have some sort of encyclopedia built into it. Like, I remember playing Fire Emblem Three Houses, just like trying to figure out what classes I wanted. Like, it it was almost like if you played to the game too far, you'd already have taken your character down one class path, and then you find out a class exists, and you weren't able to like. It'd be nice to have some of that information in the game where I didn't have to like look it up outside. But honestly, I don't mind it. For most games when I'm playing them, I have a bookmarks folder, and I will bookmark any article that has some detail that I might want to reference later. And then then when I'm done with the game, I delete that folder and make one for the next game. So it's like I guess I make my own little guide at this point, saving. And sometimes I'll come across like a Reddit post where someone has a bunch of tips that I think are useful, and I'll save that. So like it, I don't mind cobbling together my own sort of reference book. Um, but like I said, I miss the days where it was almost like an art. But I guess it was. Maybe I'm just romanticizing it. That's from 20, 15
A
years
little
ago.
bit.
I yeah.
There's so many more sources for the information. So
And it's all way more accurate now too,
yeah,
because like you could get a paper guide, and like a lot of the times you might see reviews for it on Amazon, and half the bad reviews are like, this information is straight up wrong, or it was invalidated by like a day one update to the game.
yeah.
So it's like that's the advantage of it all being within the game or on the internet, is it's always going to be up to date.
Yeah. In terms of things I like, I've stated a lot of it. Like I like the new video style stuff they put in games to show you what things are supposed to look like and do. Um, I like how we're getting more dynamic styles of tooltips and more optional HUD elements for having the stuff we want on there to remind us all the time, the stuff not. I think also dynamic tooltips for like when we remap buttons and things, and that'll come in with accessibility. A lot of this does play into accessibility. I think it'd be completely fair to let people completely opt out of a tutorial. I don't know how you do that with games that are like strongly like where it ties it into like a mission and stuff. I think that's different, but like maybe trimmed down version of it so it's especially on replays when games have like replays and stuff like that. I think they should design it like, okay, if someone's going through this a second time, they've already beat it, what can we do to make this easier on the second playthrough so they don't have to like suffer through the tutorial in the same way. One little tutorial thing that I haven't really seen since, but there hasn't been much occasion for it, is I don't like starting out with my protagonist being like OP and have their full power set, and then that gets taken away for a story reason before it puts me into the mission, or it's like then I flash back to the beginning of the game and all that, and then all that's gone. I don't like that. It gets annoying, especially because this can be remedied pretty easily. Is and Metroid, this is a thing I would also criticize a little bit about Metroid Dread, but I want to have this. I would like to see DLC that addresses this. Is it gets really upsetting when you finally collect all your power-ups or get all your upgrades and all your abilities, and then you really don't have much left of the actual core game to play with them and to experiment, and the game doesn't really push you to challenge it. It usually like you got the power bomb towards the very end, and you use it for a number of extra things, and sure, it's helpful in the final fight for a couple spots, but it's like you don't really get to use it in a creative way, and you only have it for like a short period of time. You can only use it so much, so it's you don't even get to like experiment with it. And I as far as I know, the game doesn't New Game Plus it, where you can start with the power bomb to be able to use it and see how it's like to go through enemies and stuff like that. And you could say, well, it's overpowered. That doesn't make any sense. Well, balance it for that. Like balance it so it can be used.
Dread is weird in that respect. You usually get the power bomb a lot earlier.
Right, and I get that. Like it's all over the place with the weird power-ups. But I prefer games where it gives you a decent amount of room to play with your fully unlocked power set. Guardians of the Galaxy I just beat, and actually I think it did really well. I was afraid it was going to do the exact same thing because I got really close to the end without all my powers. And while I still think they could have given me a little bit more, I think they were risking getting too far in. So I would have liked to have my abilities sooner, all of them, and then have some more game to do that, with the game being the exact same length it was now. Now, Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, is really well paced in general, but for my taste, I would have liked a little more room where I had all the powers, because at the same time, they showed you enemies that had weaknesses to powers you weren't going to get till way later. Well, one of them, only one of them. And I was like, when am I going to get this power? I must be getting around the clock soon. And then I didn't get it till basically before the end of the game. But then the final stretch, they give you enough time to play with like all your powers and stuff like that for a bit. And it's like, it's just enough. Like just enough where I was like, I'm fine with the game ending here. And I felt like I got to use my powers enough and play with it. And they gave me a bunch of enemy types to work with and try these out on. But I would like, I always appreciate that where I'm then given the time, because it'd be nice to play around with it and then find new tech and be fun. And I get that they go, well, you know, you can, that's why you replay the game. I'm like, but New Game Plus doesn't always exist. And even when they have New Game Plus, they don't always let you keep everything you've earned and start over the game with everything so you can play through and mess around with it. Whether that's for story reasons or design reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So,
I think I just wanted to say I think I would like to see more like of a hint system for games that involve like exploration or puzzle solving. I don't really want something like to give me an idea of where to go or what to do right away, but I think it would be nice if a game would like recognize, okay, well you've been messing around here for
yes,
a while. Maybe give you, and that's something you can turn on and off.
yes,
The Metroid Prime games, at least the ones I played, do that, where you know you might be wandering around with no idea where to go, but eventually they're going to say, "Oh, we detected a seismic disturbance over in this region. Better go check it out."
yeah.
And I like that approach.
I could
But
have,
I'm not like that could have been useful in Dread. I probably would have turned it off, but that would have been useful for the people who were struggling.
yes, I could have used that in one specific part of Dread. Do you remember when there's the one brick you can break that's a bomb block that's across the water? of the area that starts with a G?
No, I don't remember. I don't remember it from that description.
I'll have to send you
Um,
a video clip. I'll find it on YouTube and
yeah, you
send you.
have to.
But yeah, that one I could have used. I could have used a direction because that's the one where I was telling you I kind of almost soft locked myself because I didn't
Yeah.
before I got locked in and changed a path permanently. I didn't like destroy something the other way or a one way like gravity. No, not gravity. Grapple beam door. I didn't one way
Hmm.
destroy that and open it, so I could have had that extra path for moving around. So
Okay.
I think I still needed to actually progress through that thing at some point, but at least I would have been able to go around, find some extra stuff, and maybe work my way around it.
Yeah.
Um, but I could have used something that would have said, "Hey, this is the next critical spot." And Dread is also really good about like where secrets are, where they're like, "Hey, this is a big block. This general area has a secret, so we're just pointing you here, and now it's up to you to figure out where and how this secret works." And I found that extremely satisfying. Where sometimes I'd go and be like, "Where is it? I have no idea." And I'd spend minutes like shooting everything, and then I'd find a block and be like, "Oh, how do I do that?" And I like every single time it felt satisfying. Um,
Yeah.
but like what you said, actually, there is a game that has a very similar system, and I think a few others do, but I can't remember them exactly. But off the top of my head, the room games that are in that are mobile and also have as a VR game on Quest, they have a hint system like that because it's a puzzle based game. So what they'll do is the game itself kind of points you in a direction, and then if you're not sure, there's a 3-tier hint system. And yes, I think you can turn it off, but you can also just ignore it. Um, is first hint is like this very cryptic and just kind of says something, gives you like a keyword in a phrase. They give you like a sentence or something, and then it's in game with in game type language, and then it's cryptic, so it's not super obvious, and you just kind of okay, what does this mean? All right, sure. Second hint, more specific, less cryptic, but still a little bit cryptic. Third hint is practically telling you what you're supposed to do. So, and that's like, I think it's like 2 minutes in between where it can tell if you haven't made progress because you didn't interact with the thing that it's looking for at this point. It's like every 2 minutes or something. I'm not sure what the exact time, but it's a very appropriate window of time for you to be lost and try things. And then you can just pull down and look at the hints. So yes, I agree with you that that's there. I think Sony's like card system for PlayStation 5 is also supposed to be like developer oriented for them to put in stuff for helping you with those kind of things. I appreciate them. I think that's what they should do more of, and I think we're seeing that is for accessibility, is put in game stuff that's like okay, if you're stuck, you can use this in game resource, and we're just gonna let you progress, even if it doesn't change the game. Because I think there's a difference between telling someone how to do something and actually doing it. So it's just like execution, in like in Dread, someone could tell you exactly how to do one of the morph ball puzzles. But if you don't have the execution, or not morph ball, but morph ball, speedball, whatever, one of the optional power,
Shine Spark.
or even the shine spark, yeah. But any of those optional power up puzzles, and where it has like blocks respawning and timing, and like they could tell you this is exactly what you need to do. But if you don't have the execution ability to do it properly, or it's like it requires a bit of specific timing, like that's still a challenge. Even though you have the answer, applying the answer is still challenging. And that's my favorite type of thing, is where it's clear what you need to do, you just need to do the thing well enough. Now that I think there's a balance between making that the margin of error you can have as users. But when it's optional stuff that's not critical to your progression, I'm completely fine with that stuff being like obtuse and challenging and not even acquirable for some people. But when it comes to critical path stuff, that shouldn't be there. The game should be much more willing to explain to you what's going on, or even give you a way to bypass it or an alternate way. So yeah, I think tutorials have been uh are getting better. Accessibility options are getting better, and different games work different ways. But I think in general, you should just accommodate and let people learn, because it is an acquired language. In general, I think it takes time, and not everyone is like us, where our main hobby or as enthusiast is absorbing all sorts of information and things like that all the time. And there is an art to balancing it out, so it doesn't seem too obvious. Because like I was gonna say, like some of my pet peeves, I remember in Horizon Zero Dawn, it eventually got really annoying that like every single climbable thing was yellow. I'm like, I would love some stuff that's like not obvious to climb or whatnot. That's not always marked with the same asset because I knew. And a Horizon 2 seems to be addressing that, where it's like, hey, we're going to give you a scan thing that'll light up so we can have different varying environment. And while we still mark it, it's marked subtly. So I like also where things are marked a bit more subtly or more naturally, that it points out rather than like everything that you can climb on is yellow. And I get that some of that has to be there. There's an art to it, and that's why I said it's an art. So yeah, that was fun. I'm sure we'll have more stuff to talk about as things go on, and maybe we'll talk about. I think we're due for doing like an episode specific game, or all the way
Or
around.
game specific. Yeah, maybe that can be our first one of 2022. We can do the near episode.
That or maybe
We'll s-
something we've played more recently, because I think with Nier we have to go now. We both have to go back and get some more.
Oh
like,
yeah, we have to do our homework.
refreshers. Like I absorbed like everything within like a 2-month period for that game, and then said, "Are you ready?" And you're like, "No." And then I was checking with my cousin, and he was like, "No." And I was just like, "Come on, guys! I put in the work. How am I the better Nier fan now?"
I-
So yeah, we'll figure that out. But we should do some more game specific episodes, as well as these topic things, and we'll have to. Dread would have been a perfect thing, but you and I have argued so much offline, off cast, that we're both kind of tired of talking about it, and I think we've covered most of the stuff in this episode that we really wanted to talk
and
about.
I'm just too affected by my bias as a fan. I don't think I can see it objectively anymore. Because it's funny, like every criticism you make, I'm like, no, I can't see it. I don't see it. No.
Yeah,
So
I don't want to see it. I don't want to see it. Yeah. Yeah, we'll have to talk about some of the games we're looking forward to, and then pick one and see if we can actually coordinate, because I know we've been interested in a lot of the same games, but our schedules for what we're willing to play and interested in playing and how quickly we get through it has just been kind of off kilter. So we'll try to coordinate and figure something out there. And then that way we can do a couple more episodes like that, on top of our normal topic based stuff here. So yeah, another great episode.
yeah, I can't imagine what it would be like to start gaming when you're 30. I mean, but I'm sure people do every day.
Yeah, or like kids these days, and I mean, they can look up stuff now, but even then, still, there was an anecdote I didn't share, but you know what? That one I'll share on a different
Kids
episode.
don't play games these days. They just watch streamers play games.
That is not true, but they do watch a
Yeah.
lot of streamers too.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
Yeah. No worries. So, Ed, thanks again for being with us. Thank you to all our listeners for being with us here. We like comments, like, subscribe, whatever. We're always interested.
Leave us reviews on iTunes.
We appreciate that.
Or Apple Podcasts, but they don't call it iTunes anymore. It's Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, wherever. So we just hope you're enjoying listening. And yeah, we'll see you for the next episode.
Bye.
Woohoo!